In a small, unassuming town nestled between rolling hills and quiet neighborhoods, life moved at a predictable pace. People knew each other by name, children played freely in the streets, and weekends were spent catching up with friends over coffee or at local events. But beneath this seemingly idyllic surface lay simmering tensions that had been building for years, fueled by racial inequality, mistrust of authority, and unresolved grievances within the community. The town's police department, once respected as protectors, had become a source of unease for many residents, particularly those from minority groups who felt targeted and misunderstood. On an ordinary Tuesday evening, the air was crisp, and the sky glowed orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Shoppers filled the aisles of the local supermarket, picking out ingredients for dinner or grabbing last-minute supplies. Among them was Officer Greg Dawson, a seasoned cop with 2 decades of service under his belt. Known for his stern demeanor and no-nonsense approach, Dawson was a polarizing figure in the department. While some admired his dedication to law enforcement, others whispered about his confrontational attitude, especially when dealing with people of color. He often justified his actions as keeping the peace, but his methods left many feeling uneasy. That night, Dawson wasn't in uniform. He wore a plain black jacket and jeans, but he carried his service weapon, a habit he claimed was necessary for personal safety. As he strolled through the aisles, pushing a cart half filled with snacks and bottled water, he seemed oblivious to the weight of the resentment brewing around him. To Dawson, the world was black and white. Rules were rules, and anyone stepping out of line deserved correction. His rigid mindset had earned him both praise and criticism throughout his career, though lately the balance had tipped toward disapproval. At the same time, another man entered the supermarket, unaware that his presence would soon collide with Dawson's in a way neither could have anticipated. This man was Special Agent Marcus Reed, a highly decorated FBI agent visiting the area to assist with a federal investigation into organized crime. Unlike Dawson, Reed exuded calm confidence and warmth, traits that made him well-liked not only among colleagues but also within the communities he served. Despite his impressive credentials, Reed preferred blending into the background, avoiding attention whenever possible. That evening, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, he looked like any other shopper browsing the frozen food section. Reed's mission in town was straightforward: gather information, coordinate with local authorities, and ensure the investigation proceeded smoothly. What he didn't expect was to find himself embroiled in a situation that would test his patience, professionalism, and faith in the system he worked tirelessly to uphold. Little did he know, fate had arranged for him and Dawson to cross paths in the most unexpected and explosive way imaginable. As the clock ticked closer to 7 p.m., the supermarket buzzed with activity. Families pushed carts laden with groceries, cashiers scanned items with practiced efficiency, and the hum of fluorescent lights mingled with snippets of conversation. It was here, amidst the mundane rhythm of daily life, that everything changed. Reed stood near the frozen food aisle, reaching for a box of microwavable meals, when he accidentally bumped into someone behind him. Turning quickly to apologize, he found himself face to face with Officer Dawson. "Watch where you're going," Dawson snapped, his tone sharp and accusatory. Reed raised his hand slightly in a gesture of apology. "Sorry, my bad," he said calmly, offering a polite smile. But Dawson wasn't satisfied. Instead of accepting the apology, he narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Reed from head to toe. The fact that Reed was black seemed to trigger something in Dawson, a mix of suspicion and hostility that he couldn't, or wouldn't, suppress. "What are you doing here?" Dawson demanded, his voice rising above the ambient noise of the store. Shoppers nearby turned their heads, curiosity piqued by the sudden tension. Reed blinked, taken aback by the question. "I'm just shopping," he replied evenly, trying to defuse the situation before it escalated further. But Dawson wasn't interested in reason. To him, Reed's casual attire and demeanor somehow signaled wrongdoing, even though there was no evidence to support such a claim. "You look suspicious," Dawson continued, stepping closer. "Show me your ID." His tone brooked no argument, but Reed remained composed. "I don't need to show you anything," he responded firmly yet respectfully. "We're in a public place. I'm minding my own business." These words only seemed to enrage Dawson further. His face flushed red, and his jaw clenched tightly. Without warning, he reached for his holster and pulled out his gun, pointing it directly at Reed. The sight of the weapon sent shockwaves through the crowded supermarket. Gasps echoed as shoppers froze, unsure whether to flee or stay put. Children clung to their parents, tears streaming down their faces. Some dropped their groceries and bolted for the exits, while others crouched behind shelves, praying they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. For Reed, however, the moment was surreal. Here he was, a federal agent tasked with protecting the nation's interests, being threatened by a fellow law enforcement officer simply because of the color of his skin. Dawson's actions weren't just reckless, they were deeply symbolic. In that instant, he embodied every stereotype and fear that marginalized communities had long harbored about police brutality and racial profiling. Reed knew better than to react impulsively. Keeping his hands visible and his voice steady, he spoke clearly and deliberately. "Officer, I am Special Agent Marcus Reed with the FBI. Please lower your weapon." He reached slowly into his pocket and retrieved his badge, holding it up for Dawson to see. But instead of calming him down, the revelation only seemed to inflame Dawson further. "Don't try to pull rank on me," he shouted, his finger twitching, dangerously close to the trigger. By now, a growing crowd had gathered, recording the scene on their phones. Videos captured every word, every movement, every expression, the kind of raw, unfiltered footage that spreads like wildfire on social media. For Reed, the situation was humiliating and infuriating, but he refused to let anger get the better of him. He understood the stakes. Losing control could turn a tense standoff into something far more deadly. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the confrontation unfolded. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air, signaling the arrival of backup. Local officers rushed into the store, their weapons drawn, unsure of what they were walking into. When they saw Dawson pointing his gun at Reed, confusion gave way to disbelief. One of the responding officers recognized Reed immediately and stepped forward, attempting to mediate. "Greg, stand down," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Reluctantly, Dawson lowered his weapon, though his scowl remained firmly in place. By then, the damage had been done. Word of the incident spread rapidly, first through panicked phone calls and text messages, then via social media posts. Within hours, the entire town, and eventually the nation, would learn about the racist cop who aimed a gun at a decorated FBI agent in a supermarket. The fallout would ripple far beyond the confines of that grocery store, forcing difficult conversations about race, accountability, and the future of policing in America. For now, however, all eyes were on the two men standing in the frozen food aisle, one fuming with misplaced aggression, the other radiating quiet dignity. Neither realized it yet, but their encounter would spark a chain reaction that would leave an indelible mark on their lives, and the lives of countless others. The chaos inside the supermarket showed no signs of slowing down. As the responding officers tried to regain control, shoppers continued to flee in panic, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Some hid behind shelves or crouched near checkout, counters clutching their phones as they recorded every moment. The videos captured not just the confrontation between Officer Greg Dawson and Special Agent Marcus Reed, but also the raw emotions of those witnessing it: shock, anger, disbelief. For many, this was more than just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of deeper societal issues that had long gone unaddressed. Dawson, still visibly agitated, refused to cooperate fully with his fellow officers. His voice boomed through the store as he argued his case, insisting that Reed had acted suspiciously and that pulling his weapon was justified. "He bumped into me," Dawson shouted, pointing accusingly at Reed. "And then he wouldn't show me his ID. What was I supposed to think?" His tone carried both defiance and desperation, as if trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. But his words fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence against him. The badge Reed displayed left no room for doubt about his identity, and the recordings made by bystanders painted a damning picture of Dawson's behavior. Reed, on the other hand, remained calm throughout the ordeal. Standing tall despite the humiliation of having a gun pointed at him, he cooperated quietly with the responding officers. When asked to recount what happened, he spoke clearly and without malice, focusing on facts rather than emotion. "I was simply shopping," he explained, his voice steady. "When Officer Dawson accused me of being suspicious and demanded my ID, I identified myself as an FBI agent. Despite showing him my credentials, he escalated the situation unnecessarily." Reed's composure stood in stark contrast to Dawson's volatility, further highlighting the absurdity of the confrontation. As news of the incident spread beyond the supermarket walls, reactions began pouring in from all corners of the community. Social media platforms lit up with posts sharing the shocking footage, sparking outrage among viewers. Hashtags like "or Justice for Reed" and "Accountability Now" trended locally before exploding nationwide. Comment sections buzzed with debates about racism, police misconduct, and systemic inequality. Many condemned Dawson's actions, calling for immediate consequences. "This is exactly why people don't trust cops anymore," one user wrote. Others expressed sympathy for Reed, praising his restraint in such a volatile situation. "If anyone should be carrying a badge, it's someone like him," another commenter added. Not everyone sided with Reed, however. A vocal minority defended Dawson, arguing that his reaction was understandable given the current climate of rising crime rates. These supporters dismissed accusations of racism, claiming that Dawson was merely doing his job. "Cops have to make split-second decisions," one person commented. "You can't blame him for being cautious." Such arguments only fueled the growing divide, turning social media into a battleground of opinions. Meanwhile, local news outlets scrambled to cover the story, interviewing witnesses and experts to provide context. Reporters camped outside the supermarket and police station, eager to capture every development as it unfolded. Back at the scene, tensions remained high. Officers separated Dawson and Reed to prevent further escalation, but the atmosphere was charged with hostility. While Dawson continued to protest his innocence, Reed waited patiently, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. He understood that this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message that such behavior couldn't be tolerated, especially within law enforcement. Still, the weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. Being targeted because of his race was nothing new, but experiencing it so blatantly, and in front of so many witnesses, was jarring, even for someone accustomed to navigating prejudice. Word of the incident reached Police Chief Lydia Martinez late that evening. She had been preparing for bed when her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. At first, she assumed it was routine business, but the urgency in her colleagues' voices told her otherwise. By the time she arrived at the station, video clips of the altercation were already circulating widely online. Martinez watched them in stunned silence, her heart sinking with each passing second. As the head of the department, she knew the gravity of what had transpired, and the responsibility resting squarely on her shoulders. Martinez called an emergency meeting with top brass from the department. The room crackled with tension as leaders debated how to handle the fallout. Some suggested damage control, urging caution to avoid alienating officers who might sympathize with Dawson. Others pushed for swift action, emphasizing the need to restore public trust. Martinez listened intently, weighing every perspective, but her mind was already made up. "We cannot sweep this under the rug," she declared firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "What happened tonight is unacceptable. It violates everything we stand for as a police force." Her decision was swift and unequivocal. Officer Greg Dawson would be terminated immediately. There would be no leniency, no excuses. The message needed to be clear, not just to Dawson, but to the entire department and the community they served. Early the next morning, Martinez held a press conference to address the public. Flanked by senior officials, she stood before a sea of cameras and microphones, her expression stern yet composed. "As your police chief, I take full responsibility for ensuring accountability within our ranks," she began. "Officer Dawson's actions were reckless, discriminatory, and entirely inconsistent with the values we uphold. Effective immediately, he has been relieved of duty. The announcement sent shockwaves through the town. Supporters of reform cheered Martinez's decisiveness, hailing her as a champion of justice. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read "No justice, no peace," and chanting slogans demanding broader changes. Their chants echoed through the streets, drawing attention from neighboring towns and cities. Media outlets hailed Martinez's leadership, praising her willingness to hold one of her own accountable, a rare move in an era where law enforcement often closed ranks to protect its own. But not everyone applauded Martinez's decision. Critics accused her of overreacting, arguing that firing Dawson without a formal investigation was premature. They claimed she had succumbed to public pressure rather than following due process. Some officers within the department grumbled privately, feeling betrayed by what they saw as an abandonment of loyalty. Yet Martinez remained steadfast, knowing that true leadership required making tough choices, even when they came at a personal cost. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the incident continued to reverberate. Dawson disappeared from public view, reportedly struggling to cope with the loss of his career and reputation. Neighbors described him as withdrawn and bitter, unable to comprehend how his life had unraveled so quickly. Meanwhile, Reed returned to his duties with renewed determination. Though shaken by the experience, he refused to let it define him. Instead, he channeled his energy into advocating for meaningful change, using his platform to speak out against racial profiling and police brutality. Reed's resilience inspired many. Local schools invited him to give talks where he shared his story with students, encouraging them to pursue careers in law enforcement while remaining vigilant against prejudice. Community centers hosted forums led by Reed, bringing together residents and officers to discuss ways to bridge the gap between law enforcement and marginalized groups. Slowly but surely, the town began to heal. Those scars lingered as reminders of the work still needed. For Chief Martinez, the incident marked a turning point in her tenure. Under her guidance, the department implemented sweeping reforms designed to rebuild trust with the community. Mandatory bias training became standard for all officers, along with increased oversight and transparency measures. Martinez also launched initiatives aimed at fostering dialogue, hosting town hall meetings where residents could voice concerns and offer suggestions. Her efforts earned widespread recognition, solidifying her reputation as a trailblazer in modern policing. Yet the road ahead remained long. While the supermarket standoff had exposed deep-seated issues, it also highlighted the potential for progress when people came together to demand better. For many, the incident served as a wake-up call, a reminder that change, though difficult, was possible. And though challenges lay ahead, hope flickered brightly, fueled by the belief that even in moments of darkness, transformation could take root. The days following the supermarket incident were a whirlwind of emotions, reactions, and consequences that rippled far beyond the small town where it had occurred. The story dominated headlines nationwide, sparking conversations about racism, accountability, and the role of law enforcement in society. For Officer Greg Dawson, life as he knew it came crashing down. Stripped of his badge and gun, he became a pariah, shunned not only by his former colleagues but also by many in the community. His attempts to defend himself fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the tidal wave of public outrage. Dawson retreated into isolation, spending most of his time holed up in his modest home on the outskirts of town. Neighbors who once greeted him with nods or waves now avoided eye contact, their silence speaking volumes. Some even went so far as to move away, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had brought shame to the neighborhood. Friends stopped calling, and family members distanced themselves, embarrassed by the spotlight his behavior had cast on their name. To make matters worse, finding employment proved nearly impossible. Every job application he submitted was met with rejection, often accompanied by scathing comments about his past conduct. Employers didn't want anything to do with someone labeled a racist cop. Despite his fall from grace, Dawson refused to accept responsibility for what had happened. In private conversations with close acquaintances or those few who still tolerated him, he insisted that he'd done nothing wrong. "I was just doing my job," he would say, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You can't blame me for being cautious. Look at the state of the world today." But these arguments sounded hollow even to him. Deep down, Dawson wrestled with conflicting emotions. Anger at how quickly his career had ended, frustration over the backlash he faced, and a gnawing sense of regret that he couldn't quite bring himself to acknowledge. He spent hours staring at the ceiling at night, replaying the events in his mind, wondering if things could have gone differently, if he'd made a mistake. Meanwhile, Special Agent Marcus Reed emerged as a symbol of resilience and dignity. Despite the trauma of having a gun pointed at him simply because of his race, Reed chose not to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he focused on turning the incident into an opportunity for growth and change. In interviews, he spoke candidly about his experience, emphasizing the importance of systemic reform rather than placing blame solely on individuals like Dawson. "What happened to me isn't unique," Reed told one journalist during a televised interview. "It's part of a pattern, a symptom of larger issues we need to address. My goal is to ensure no one else has to go through this." Reed's calm demeanor and thoughtful insights earned him widespread admiration. People saw him not just as a victim of racism, but as a leader willing to use his platform to drive meaningful progress. Schools and community organizations clamored to invite him to speak, eager to hear his perspective on bridging the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At each event, Reed delivered powerful messages about empathy, understanding, and the shared responsibility to create a fairer, more equitable society. His words resonated deeply, inspiring both young people and seasoned professionals alike. One memorable moment came when Reed visited a local high school auditorium packed with students. Standing at the podium, he recounted the supermarket incident in detail, describing how it felt to be treated as a threat despite identifying himself as an FBI agent. "In that moment," he said, pausing to let his words sink in, "I realized something important. Change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with awareness, with recognizing biases and working actively to overcome them." The audience sat in rapt attention, moved by his vulnerability and determination. When he finished speaking, a standing ovation erupted, echoing through the hall long after he stepped off stage. While Reed inspired hope, Police Chief Lydia Martinez worked tirelessly to implement reforms within her department. Determined to prevent similar incidents in the future, she introduced a series of initiatives aimed at fostering accountability and rebuilding trust. Mandatory bias training sessions became a cornerstone of the program, requiring officers to confront uncomfortable truths about racial stereotypes and implicit prejudice. These workshops weren't easy. Many participants squirmed in their seats as facilitators challenged long-held beliefs. But they sparked critical discussions that forced officers to reflect on their roles in perpetuating systemic inequities. Martinez also pushed for greater transparency, establishing a civilian oversight board tasked with reviewing complaints against officers. Comprised of diverse members representing various segments of the community, the board provided an additional layer of accountability, ensuring that grievances were addressed fairly and impartially. Additionally, body cameras were distributed to all officers, with strict guidelines mandating their use during interactions with the public. The footage captured by these devices would serve as evidence in cases of alleged misconduct, helping to hold officers accountable for their actions. To bridge the divide between law enforcement and residents, Martinez launched a series of town hall meetings designed to encourage open dialogue. Held monthly in different parts of the town, these gatherings gave community members a safe space to voice concerns, share experiences, and offer suggestions for improvement. Officers attended as well, sitting alongside civilians to listen and respond directly to feedback. At first, tensions ran high, with some attendees venting years of pent-up frustration. But over time, the meetings fostered mutual understanding, laying the groundwork for collaboration and healing. As weeks turned into months, signs of progress began to emerge. Trust between the police department and the community slowly started to rebuild. though scars remained visible. Residents noticed subtle changes in officer behavior, more smiles, fewer harsh tones, and a willingness to engage genuinely with people. Complaints about misconduct dropped significantly, and surveys showed increased satisfaction with the department's performance. While there was still much work to be done, the shift was undeniable. For Dawson, however, redemption seemed elusive. Isolated and disgraced, he struggled to find meaning in his new reality. One evening, while scrolling through social media, he stumbled upon a video of Reed addressing a crowd at a community event. Watching Reed speak with such poise and conviction stirred something deep within him, a flicker of self-awareness he hadn't felt before. For the first time, Dawson allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Maybe his actions hadn't been justified after all. Though he kept this realization to himself, it marked the beginning of a slow, painful journey toward introspection. Whether Dawson would ever fully come to terms with his mistakes remained uncertain, but the seeds of change had been planted. And in the broader context of the town's recovery, his personal struggles paled in comparison to the strides being made toward a brighter, more inclusive future. For Reed and Martinez, the supermarket incident served as a catalyst for transformation, not just within the police department but across the entire community. Their efforts demonstrated that accountability, coupled with compassion and perseverance, could pave the way for lasting change. As the town continued to heal, its residents clung to the hope that moments of darkness could give rise to opportunities for light. Months after the supermarket incident, the town began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock and outrage had given way to a quieter, more reflective phase, as people processed what had happened and considered how it might shape their future. For many residents, the confrontation between Officer Greg Dawson and Special Agent Marcus Reed wasn't just a single event. It was a mirror reflecting long-standing issues of racial inequality and mistrust in law enforcement. While some wounds were healing, others remained raw, serving as reminders of the work still needed to create lasting change. Officer Dawson's life had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. Once a respected figure in the department, he now lived in near total isolation, shunned by colleagues, friends, and even family members who couldn't reconcile his actions with their values. His days blurred together, filled with monotony and regret. He spent hours scrolling through news articles and social media posts about the incident, reading comments that ranged from harsh criticism to outright hatred. Each negative remark felt like another blow, chipping away at whatever pride or self-worth he had left. Despite his denial in public, privately, Dawson began to question whether he'd made a grave mistake. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he replayed the scene in his mind the moment he pulled out his gun. The look of calm defiance on Reed's face, the gasps of terrified shoppers. These memories haunted him, gnawing at his conscience. One evening, while flipping through channels on TV, he stumbled upon an interview featuring Agent Reed. Sitting alone in his dimly lit living room, Dawson listened intently as Reed spoke about forgiveness, accountability, and the importance of learning from mistakes. "It's not easy to admit you're wrong," Reed said, his tone measured but firm. "But doing so is the first step toward growth." Dawson paused the video, staring blankly at the frozen image of Reed on the screen. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to entertain the idea that perhaps he had been wrong, that his assumptions about Reed had been rooted in prejudice rather than fact. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving him breathless and shaken. Yet, instead of pushing the thought aside as he normally would, Dawson sat with it, letting the weight of his actions sink in. It was uncomfortable, painful even, but also strangely liberating. He didn't know what to do next, but this small spark of self-awareness gave him hope that maybe, someday, he could find a way to move forward. Meanwhile, Special Agent Marcus Reed continued to inspire those around him with his resilience and commitment to justice. Since the incident, he had become a prominent voice in discussions about police reform and racial equity. His ability to rise above bitterness and focus on solutions earned him widespread admiration, not only from activists, but also from everyday citizens seeking guidance on how to foster meaningful change. Reed traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events across the country. Wherever he went, crowds gathered to hear his message of hope and determination. One particularly memorable event took place at a large auditorium in the state capitol. Hundreds of people packed the venue, eager to catch a glimpse of the man whose courage had sparked a national conversation. As Reed stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing off the walls. Smiling warmly, he waved before taking his seat at the podium. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady and sincere. "I want to start by saying something important. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and we all carry biases, whether we realize it or not. What matters most is how we choose to respond when those biases are exposed." Reed went on to share stories from his own life, recounting moments when he had faced discrimination and how those experiences shaped his worldview. He emphasized the need for empathy and understanding, urging listeners to challenge their preconceived notions and engage in difficult conversations about race and privilege. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he reminded them. "It takes effort, patience, and a willingness to listen, even when it's uncomfortable." By the end of his speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. People lined up afterward to shake his hand, thanking him for his wisdom and encouragement. Back in the town where the incident occurred, Police Chief Lydia Martinez remained steadfast in her mission to transform the department. Her leadership during the crisis had earned her national recognition, with media outlets praising her swift decision to fire Dawson and her subsequent efforts to implement reforms. Under her guidance, the department underwent significant changes, including stricter hiring practices, enhanced training programs, and increased community engagement initiatives. Officers were required to attend workshops on cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution, equipping them with tools to navigate complex situations without resorting to aggression. Martinez also prioritized transparency, ensuring that the public had access to information about the department's operations. She introduced monthly reports detailing officer conduct, use of force incidents, and citizen complaints, making it clear that accountability was non-negotiable. Body camera footage became standard protocol, providing an objective record of interactions between officers and civilians. This policy proved instrumental in resolving disputes and addressing allegations of misconduct, fostering greater trust between law enforcement and the community. Perhaps the most impactful initiative was the creation of a youth mentorship program, designed to connect young people, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, with positive role models within the police force. Officers volunteered their time to coach sports teams, lead career workshops, and participate in school outreach programs. These activities helped break down stereotypes and build rapport, showing kids that cops weren't just authority figures, but human beings capable of kindness and compassion. Parents praised the program, noting how it had changed their children's perceptions of law enforcement. As these reforms took hold, the atmosphere in the town shifted noticeably. Residents reported feeling safer and more confident interacting with officers, who seemed genuinely invested in building relationships rather than enforcing rules. Complaints about misconduct dropped sharply, and surveys showed a marked improvement in public perception of the department. While challenges remained, such as occasional pushback from veteran officers resistant to change, the overall trajectory was promising. For Dawson, however, redemption remained elusive. Though he had begun to acknowledge his mistakes, rebuilding his reputation seemed impossible. One day, while walking through the park, he overheard two teenagers discussing the supermarket incident. "That cop got what he deserved," one of them said dismissively. Dawson flinched, his heart sinking at the reminder of how deeply his actions had damaged his standing in the community. Yet, instead of retreating into bitterness, he resolved to take small steps toward personal growth. He started volunteering anonymously at a local food bank, finding solace in helping others without expecting recognition. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In contrast, Reed and Martinez stood as beacons of progress, embodying the belief that individuals could drive systemic change. Their partnership, though informal, proved invaluable in navigating the aftermath of the incident. Together, they demonstrated that accountability and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Indeed, they were essential components of true leadership. As the town continued its journey toward healing, their example served as a guiding light, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, transformation was possible. The supermarket standoff had exposed deep flaws in society, but it had also ignited a movement, a collective effort to confront injustice and build a better future. For every tear shed, there was a story of resilience. For every act of hate, there was an act of love. And for every setback, there was a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was long, but the town and the nation was ready to walk it together. The months following the supermarket incident marked a turning point, not only for the small town but also for the individuals at the center of the storm. What had begun as a confrontation in a frozen food aisle evolved into a catalyst for profound change, touching lives far beyond those directly involved. As the dust settled, the ripple effects of that fateful evening continued to shape the community, its leaders, and even the nation's broader conversations about race, accountability, and justice. For Officer Greg Dawson, the journey toward redemption, if it could be called that, was slow and painful. Though he had taken tentative steps toward self-awareness, the weight of his actions still hung heavily over him. Volunteering at the local food bank became a lifeline, offering him a sense of purpose amid the isolation. He worked quietly, stacking cans and sorting donations without drawing attention to himself. Occasionally, he'd overhear snippets of conversation from other volunteers or patrons, some discussing the supermarket incident, others talking about racism and police reform. Each mention stung, but instead of retreating further into bitterness, Dawson began listening more closely. One Saturday morning, while organizing boxes of produce, Dawson struck up a brief conversation with an elderly woman who frequented the food bank. She didn't recognize him, which allowed him to speak freely. "I used to be a cop," he admitted hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked at him curiously, but nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I messed up big time," he confessed. "Did something I'm not proud of." To his surprise, she didn't respond with anger or judgment. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his arm and said, "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what you do next." Her words lingered with him long after their interaction ended, planting another seed of hope in his heart. Encouraged by this small exchange, Dawson decided to take a bolder step. He reached out to Police Chief Lydia Martinez, requesting a meeting. At first, Martinez was skeptical, unsure whether Dawson's intentions were genuine. But when they finally sat down, together in her office, she saw something different in him, a humility and willingness to confront his past that hadn't been there before. Dawson expressed remorse for his actions and asked if there was any way he could contribute to the department's reform efforts, even informally. While Martinez couldn't reinstate him, she agreed to let him assist with community outreach programs, under strict supervision. It wasn't much, but for Dawson it felt like a chance to begin making amends. Special Agent Marcus Reed, meanwhile, continued to shine as a beacon of resilience and progress. His advocacy work had expanded beyond local boundaries, earning him invitations to speak at national forums and international conferences. Yet, despite his growing fame, Reed remained grounded, always prioritizing the needs of marginalized communities over personal accolades. One of his most impactful initiatives was the creation of a mentorship program aimed at young people interested in law enforcement careers. Dubbed Pathways to Justice, the program paired aspiring officers with seasoned professionals who emphasized ethics, empathy, and cultural sensitivity. Reed often participated in these sessions himself, sharing his experiences and insights with wide-eyed participants eager to learn from his example. During one such session, a teenage girl raised her hand timidly and asked, "What should I do if I face discrimination in my career?" Reed smiled warmly, leaning forward to address her question. "You'll encounter challenges no matter where you go," he replied honestly. "But remember, your voice matters. Speak up, stand firm, and surround yourself with allies who believe in fairness. Together, we can create spaces where everyone feels valued." His answer earned thunderous applause, leaving the girl visibly inspired. Back in the town, the reforms spearheaded by Police Chief Lydia Martinez bore fruit in ways both tangible and intangible. Trust between the community and the police force improved significantly thanks to consistent transparency and meaningful engagement. Monthly town hall meetings became standing room-only events, with residents actively participating in discussions about safety, accountability, and collaboration. Officers, once viewed with suspicion, were now seen shaking hands, laughing with kids, and joining neighborhood cleanup drives. These interactions may have seemed minor, but they symbolized a seismic shift in perception. Martinez herself became a role model for progressive leadership, frequently invited to share her strategies at law enforcement summits across the country. In one particularly poignant speech, she reflected on the supermarket incident and its aftermath. "That night changed us all," she said, her voice steady yet emotional. "It forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our systems. But it also showed us that change is possible when we commit to doing better, for ourselves, for each other, and for future generations." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the audience. As the town healed, the scars of the past served as reminders of how far they had come and how much farther they needed to go. A memorial mural was unveiled near the supermarket, commemorating the incident as a pivotal moment in the fight for racial equity and police reform. Painted by local artists, the vibrant artwork depicted diverse faces united in solidarity, alongside quotes from Reed and Martinez about courage, accountability, and unity. Residents gathered for the unveiling ceremony, many wiping away tears as they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Even Officer Dawson found solace in the mural, visiting it late one evening when the streets were empty. Standing before the colorful depiction of resilience and hope, he felt a mix of emotions: guilt for his role in creating pain, pride in seeing the community rise above it, and determination to keep moving forward. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he might regain some measure of respect, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, humble efforts to make things right. In the end, the supermarket standoff proved to be more than just a single event. It was a turning point that illuminated flaws and sparked transformation. It exposed the deep-seated biases and systemic inequities that plague society, but it also revealed the power of accountability, compassion, and collective action. Through the courage of individuals like Marcus Reed and Lydia Martinez, the town demonstrated that even in moments of darkness, light could emerge. As life in the town returned to its quiet rhythm, the lessons of that fateful evening endured. Conversations about race and policing continued, fueled by a shared commitment to building a fairer, more inclusive world. Children played freely in the streets again, families shopped without fear at the supermarket, and neighbors greeted each other with warmth and trust. The road ahead was still long, fraught with challenges and setbacks, but the town faced it together, with hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change. And so, what had begun as a tense standoff in a grocery store aisle blossomed into a story of redemption, growth, and renewal. It reminded everyone involved, and countless others watching from afar, that while mistakes are inevitable, the true measure of character lies in how we respond to them. The supermarket incident may have started as a tragedy, but it ultimately became a testament to the enduring human spirit and the boundless potential for progress.